So today will be a little bit different. I decided I wanted to share something that happened today that I think is worthwhile discussing. Yeah, so as you may or may not know, I'm a student in university right now, and one of the things I do is I tutor. One reason I tutor is because I make a little bit of money. That's nice. Another reason is because I can refresh on classes I already took. And then a third reason is I get to help people, and the order that I value those things shifts depending on how I'm feeling or what's going on. Sometimes I value the money more, sometimes I don't really care about the money, sometimes I really value helping people. And so what I want to discuss is how I acted in the face of difficulty. Today I was tutoring someone and she is not from the same background that these classes require. In fact, she isn't really from the background. It's a programming class that I was helping with, and she's an introductory programming class, and she isn't really familiar with programming. Or really basic algebra, so there's a lot of things that I could suggest that may seem easy for me and come natural to me. I'm in engineering, and I've been pretty math and science heavy my whole life, so a lot of this stuff I know at the back of my hand. And so it's really interesting seeing the other side, I suppose. What I want to discuss, though, is what was going through my mind when I was helping her through a step in this homework problem. You needed to convert from seconds inverse to hours inverse, and so I was taking her through the dimensional analysis, and it was interesting because she didn't really understand what seconds inverse meant. She kept on thinking it needed to be something physical, so like miles an hour or feet per second or meters per second. It couldn't just be seconds inverse by itself, which is interesting because maybe 10 years ago I would have thought the same thing, but it was really interesting because even as I explained it to her, the same thing multiple times, I initially, and she didn't understand still, I initially became, I started to get a little angry, a little impatient, more frustrated than angry with her, but no, maybe a little frustrated with her, maybe not personally, but just frustrated that the way I was explaining wasn't sufficient. It seemed like I was doing a sufficient explanation, and for some reason the result was that she still didn't understand. That kind of frustrated me, because usually when I explain something to someone, they understand within the first time, but this took multiple times, and I'm still pretty sure she doesn't really get it. Still, it kind of frustrated me at first at the time, and then she got it, kinda. We proceeded anyway. I don't remember if it was during or after, but an outcome of this experience is that you can kind of treat this difficulty in teaching and in explanation, less of as frustration and more of as a challenge. I've really never explained something to someone really clearly, in my opinion, and have them still understand. You can't really control where they come from or how they interpret things, but what you can control is how you react to the situation, and how you perceive it. So at first I was thinking of it as a source of frustration, something that I was doing wrong, that it was my fault, I suppose. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and yeah, since it doesn't happen that often, it's kind of a challenge. Interpret it as a challenge. Like, I could get mad, I could get furious and lose my cool, or instead I could accept the challenge of figuring out what's going through this person's head and figuring out how I can explain this concept perfectly. It's just intriguing. It's really interesting. Usually you can explain something to someone and then they'll nod their head and be like, oh yeah, yeah. But I suppose that isn't always the case. Like, to really, I feel like it's like a art. Like, you have to be some sort of master, like a master craftsman, to be able to explain something to someone, and to anyone, in fact, so that they can understand it. You take for granted, this goes back to my background. I have a really heavy background in math and science and engineering. I'm near the end of my undergraduate degree in engineering. I took physics and calculus in high school. I read about this stuff on my free time. You really take for granted what happens to be in your worldview, and you might impose that on other people's worldviews. And what I mean by that is you might think that other people might know the things that you know. It's, you know, it's like coming from, this might sound holier than thou, but I think it's a good analogy. It might be when you're outside of the cave and you try to explain someone that there's a sun out there, and they're chained to they're chained staring, looking at shadows, and they think you're a fool. Or maybe they just cock their head and they're confused. It's fascinating what the difference that exists between those two different viewpoints. It's really interesting too how I immediately recognized that, maybe not immediately, but how I eventually recognized that I'm in control of my worldview, how I interpret the situation. I tell myself stuff like that quite a lot, but there aren't many in-the-moment situations when I think about that, when I'm like, calm down, you're in control. That doesn't happen often, but it's incredibly true. You completely control your worldview, and how you perceive it. There's some quote attributed to someone that says, "The world doesn't change, you do." And at least in terms of psychology, not like actual world events, I find that to be pretty true. People always wish they were, you hear it a lot, people always wish they were kids again because they didn't have to worry about anything, or there's the concept of money and how that controls people's lives. That wasn't really even present. These ideas that come into people's lives tend to dominate how they see the world. And so, like, me really knowing math and science and engineering, being very confident in them, and then facing a person that is completely unfamiliar and is throwing themselves on something. It doesn't matter how they got into the world, they're there. Is it fair for me to, if they're seeking out help, for me to get angry at them? That's really like one of the things that went through my head. Is it really fair to do that? They're paying me, they're reaching out for help. Is that fair? You know, I should really try to just help. However, we can take this a step farther, or further, if you will. Suppose this was with someone that was already familiar, or should be familiar with these concepts. Maybe, say they have a degree in engineering, like I will quite soon, and you know, I'm coming from. Okay, well, let's do this. Say I'm coming from a place. I'm asking someone for help. If we're both, you know, educated in this field, we should both have the same general knowledge, and this is important for this discussion. If this person begins to attempt to help me, and they need to explain the things I should already know, and I ask about the things I already should know because I'm in this field, I don't think that is where you should give people a chance. That doesn't show you're prepared. It doesn't really show that you value this person's time. It shows that you're kind of you're not dedicated to what you're doing. You're not dedicated to your craft by effectively being unprepared in it. And so that's where the difference is. If this person I was helping was, you know, more in the programming field, I think it would be fair to expect a little bit more out of them. But, you know, upon evaluating where they're coming from, you shouldn't expect so much out of every person, no matter what. You should, you know, look at their ethos, look at their credibility based on what they have. Do they have this background? Should I give them the benefit of the doubt? If they have a background, I probably shouldn't. If you don't know basic, you know, fundamental concepts, and you're asking me about this more complicated thing, you don't give a shit. You don't care. That's where the difference is. So you need to recognize, you know, where do you draw the line, and you know, you'll have to figure out where each person is coming from, and you know, try to figure out their background, because if someone is unprepared and know, they do come from that background. I've already said this. You shouldn't spend time on them because they don't care. I'm repeating myself. Anywho, I'd be interested to hear any other thoughts or comments. It's an interesting insight that I had today, so let me know. Thank you.